You've heard the stories, the ones about abandoned houses sitting on the edge of town, left to rot and be forgotten. But the real question is, why were they left behind in the first place? What horrors drove people away, never to return? Tonight, you'll hear the chilling truth behind those whispers. In tonight's episode, we explore 3 terrifying tales of people who dared to enter homes that were better left alone. First, 2 friends find themselves trapped inside a decaying mansion where something sinister is watching. Next, a man helps his cousin clean out an inherited home, only to find it isn't as empty as it seems. And finally, a curious newcomer in a small town stumbles upon a cursed farm that refuses to let go of its visitors. These people thought they were just exploring old, forgotten places. But little did they know, they had just entered the realm of Mr. Scary Guy. Prepare yourself for a journey beyond the ordinary, into the shadows of your deepest fears. Welcome to the world of Mr. Scary Guy. I've always had an odd fascination with abandoned places. Maybe it was the thrill of danger or the chance to explore forgotten history. But whenever I saw a decaying house with boarded-up windows and crumbling walls, I couldn't resist the temptation to peek inside. I never thought anything bad could actually happen, until the day I stepped foot inside the house on Ridgeview Lane. It was the summer of 2022, and I was on a road trip with my friend Tom. We'd been driving aimlessly through rural Pennsylvania, looking for something to break up the monotony of endless farmland. That's when we saw it, just off the main road. A massive Victorian house, hidden behind overgrown trees and brush.
Looks like it's been abandoned for decades,
Tom said as we pulled up to the rusted gate.
You want to check it out?
I didn't hesitate. We parked the car and made our way toward the house. The front yard was a jungle of weeds and vines, and the house itself was in even worse shape. Paint peeled from the siding, and several windows were broken, revealing nothing but darkness inside.
Place gives me the creeps,
Tom muttered, though I could hear the curiosity in his voice. He wasn't turning back, and neither was I. We pushed through the front door, which hung crookedly on its hinges, and stepped into the entry hall. The air inside was stale and heavy, filled with the smell of mildew and rot. Dust clung to every surface, and the silence was oppressive, like the house itself was holding its breath. It's bigger than I expected, I said, my voice echoing faintly through the hall. As we wandered deeper, it became clear this place had been abandoned for a long time. Old, rotting furniture sat untouched, and there were remnants of the past, an old newspaper from the 1960s, a cracked mirror, family portraits so faded you could barely make out the faces. Everything was frozen in time. We eventually made our way to the second floor, where the atmosphere felt different. Heavier. I can't explain it, but there was a strange tension in the air, like we weren't alone. I tried to brush it off as nerves, but then I heard it, a soft creak, like footsteps on the floorboards above us. Did you hear that? I asked, glancing at Tom.
Probably just the house settling,
he replied, but I could tell he was just as spooked as I was. We moved cautiously down the hallway, pausing outside each door. Most of the rooms were empty, their doors left open as if inviting us in. But there was one door at the end of the hall that was closed and locked.
What do you think's in there?
Tom whispered, staring at the door. I didn't know, but something about it unnerved me. My instincts screamed to turn back, but curiosity won out. We searched the nearby rooms until we found a rusty key lying on the floor of what must have been a bedroom. It looked old, as if it had been waiting for someone to find it. The key slid into the lock with surprising ease, and the door creaked open. Inside, the room was dark. So dark we couldn't see more than a few feet in front of us. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam illuminated a small, cluttered space. Dust-covered furniture was scattered around, but what caught my eye was the large wooden chest in the corner. It looked ancient, its surface carved with strange symbols I didn't recognize. The air in the room felt colder, and I could swear I heard faint whispering, like someone speaking just out of earshot.
Let's open it,
Tom said, stepping forward. I hesitated, but Tom was already kneeling beside the chest, prying open the heavy lid. The hinges squealed, and inside we found bones. Human bones, piled haphazardly in the chest. Some were still attached to scraps of decayed clothing, and a skull stared up at us with empty eye sockets. I stumbled back, my heart racing. "We need to leave, now." But before we could move, the door slammed shut behind us. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, filling the room with a chilling sense of dread. I turned to the door, tugging at the handle, but it wouldn't budge.
We're trapped,
Tom said, his voice trembling. "What the hell is happening?" Suddenly, the room grew colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally. The whispering turned into a low, guttural moan, and then, from the darkest corner of the room, something moved. It was a figure, tall and gaunt, its face hidden beneath a hood of shadows. The air around it crackled with an unnatural energy. It spoke, though I couldn't understand the words. But the intent was clear. It was angry, furious. This house had been its domain for decades, and we had trespassed where we didn't belong. I backed away, grabbing Tom's arm. "We have to get out of here." The figure moved closer, its form flickering like a dying flame. I felt a cold hand brush against my arm, and panic surged through me. In a last-ditch effort, I threw my weight against the door, and it burst open with a loud crack. We didn't look back as we sprinted down the stairs and out of the house, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. The moment we crossed the threshold, the oppressive weight lifted, and the whispering stopped. We jumped into the car and sped away, not daring to speak until the house was far behind us.
That was real, right?
Tom finally asked, his voice shaky. I nodded, still trying to calm my racing heart. "Yeah, it was real." We never went back to Ridgeview Lane, and I never set foot in another abandoned house again. Whatever we disturbed in that place, it's still there, waiting for the next person foolish enough to enter. I've always been a skeptic when it comes to ghosts. The supernatural? Not my thing. So when my cousin Brian asked me to help him clean out an old house he inherited from a distant relative, I didn't think twice about saying yes. It was just an old house, right? The place was tucked away on the outskirts of town, surrounded by nothing but fields and overgrown trees. It had been abandoned for years, left to decay after the previous owner, an old woman none of us had ever met, passed away. The locals called it cursed, but I figured it was just small town superstition. We arrived late in the afternoon, the sun already beginning to set. The house looked worse than I expected. Its roof sagged, and the windows were so dirty you could barely see through them. But the worst part? The front door was wide open, as if waiting for us.
Creepy,
Brian muttered as we stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of decay was overwhelming. We got to work, clearing out old furniture, boxes of junk, and newspapers from decades ago. Most of it was just trash, but as the evening wore on, I started to feel uneasy. Every so often I'd hear something, a faint creak or a soft thud coming from upstairs. Brian didn't seem to notice, so I chalked it up to the house settling. It wasn't until we found the attic door that things really started to get strange. The door was hidden behind a bookshelf in the upstairs hallway, and we only discovered it by accident. It was locked, but Brian managed to pry it open with a crowbar. As soon as the door swung open, a gust of cold air hit us, and I swear I heard a whisper. Just a single word.
Come.
Brian didn't hear it, or at least he pretended he didn't.
Let's check it out,
He said, heading up the narrow staircase. The attic was dark, with only a small window at the far end, letting in the last traces of daylight. Boxes were piled everywhere, covered in dust. But what caught my attention was the old rocking chair in the corner. It was swaying, slowly, as if someone had just gotten up from it. I pointed it out to Brian, but he shrugged.
Must be the wind.
But there was no wind, and the deeper we went into the attic, the more unsettled I became. I kept hearing faint whispers like someone was standing right behind me, speaking just out of earshot. My skin crawled, and I felt like we were being watched. Then we found it, the mirror. It was large, covered with a sheet, and shoved into the corner like someone had tried to hide it. When Brian pulled the sheet off, we both froze. The mirror was cracked, its surface covered in strange, jagged lines. But what was worse was the reflection. In the mirror, I saw us standing there, but we weren't alone. Behind us, there was a figure, a woman, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes black pits. She stood just inches away from me, staring into the mirror. I whipped around, but there was no one there. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Brian's face had gone pale. He nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the mirror. We backed away, too afraid to look at the reflection again. That's when the rocking chair started moving faster, creaking loudly in the silence of the attic. And then the whispers came back. Louder this time, more frantic, filling the room. We bolted for the door, racing down the stairs and out of the house, not stopping until we reached the car. I don't know how long we sat there, catching our breath, but neither of us could shake the feeling that something had followed us. We never went back to that house. Brian ended up selling it to some out-of-state buyer, and as far as I know, no one lives there now. But sometimes, late at night, I can still hear those whispers in my head. The same ones that called to us from the attic. That damn house isn't just abandoned. It's waiting. Waiting for the next person, foolish enough to listen to the whispers and step inside. It was late fall, and I had recently moved to the small town of Wyndham to escape the pressures of the city. My job was remote, and I thought a change of pace would help me focus. The house I rented was just a few miles away from Black Hollow Farm, a long-forgotten property nestled deep in the woods. My neighbors rarely mentioned it, but whenever they did, their voices would drop, and their eyes would dart around as if the farm itself might be listening. Naturally, I became curious. I couldn't resist the temptation to explore it. I had always enjoyed the thrill of abandoned places, and Black Hollow Farm sounded like the perfect mystery. One rainy weekend, I decided to check it out. The farm was isolated, hidden at the end of a long, winding dirt road. As I got closer, the trees became thicker, blocking out most of the remaining daylight. It wasn't long before the house came into view, and when it did, I felt an immediate sense of dread. Black Hollow Farm was massive, much larger than I expected. The farmhouse, though old and crumbling, still held an ominous presence. The roof sagged, and the windows were either boarded up or shattered, leaving dark, hollow spaces where eyes should be. The storm clouds overhead rumbled, and rain began to pour harder as if nature itself was warning me to turn back. But I pressed on. The front porch creaked under my weight, and the old wood seemed ready to give way at any moment. I reached for the rusted doorknob and gave it a gentle twist. To my surprise, the door swung open easily, as though it had been waiting for me. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of mildew and damp earth. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and the floorboards groaned beneath my feet. I shined my flashlight around the room, revealing old broken furniture scattered haphazardly. But what caught my attention was the fireplace. Above the mantel, there was a large, old painting of a family. They looked wealthy, almost too perfect, like they didn't belong in this decaying place. But their eyes were cold, lifeless. I couldn't shake the feeling that the people in the painting were watching me. I tore my gaze away and continued exploring. Each room I entered felt heavier, as though the house itself was pressing down on me. In the dining room, the long table was still set with dusty dishes, as if the family had left in the middle of a meal and never returned. But something was wrong. The chairs were all overturned, and the plates were shattered on the floor. Then I heard it, a soft, rhythmic creaking coming from upstairs. It was faint at first, almost like a rocking chair swaying back and forth. My stomach turned as I realized I wasn't alone. Against my better judgment, I followed the sound up the staircase. Each step felt like a warning, but I couldn't stop myself. When I reached the top, the creaking stopped. The hallway stretched out in front of me, dimly lit by the flicker of lightning through a cracked window. Doors lined either side, each one closed tightly. But one at the far end of the hall was slightly ajar. I approached cautiously, pushing the door open with a shaky hand. Inside was a bedroom, simple but eerily preserved. An old rocking chair sat by the window, swaying gently, even though there was no breeze. My flashlight flickered and I felt the temperature drop.
Then I saw it, the mirror on the wall. It was cracked, like the one downstairs, but more disturbing. In the reflection, I could see the room behind me, but something else was there. A figure standing in the shadows near the doorway. Its form was barely visible, cloaked in darkness, but its eyes, they glowed faintly, watching me. I spun around, but the figure was gone. My heart raced, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I wasn't alone in this house. I backed out of the room, keeping my flashlight trained on the door as I moved down the hallway. I had to get out of there. But as I descended the stairs, the door at the bottom slammed shut with a deafening bang. The house groaned, as if it were waking up, and the air grew suffocatingly cold. The creaking sound returned, louder now, echoing through the walls. I rushed down the stairs, my breath coming in ragged gasps. When I reached the door, I grabbed the handle, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the room, and I turned to see the painting above the fireplace. The faces of the family had changed, their expressions twisted into cruel smiles, their eyes following me. The house was alive, and it wanted me. Desperate, I ran to the nearest window and smashed it with the butt of my flashlight. The storm outside was in full force now. Rain pouring in as lightning flashed across the sky. I didn't care about the glass shards, I just needed to get out. I crawled through the broken window, cutting my hands and arms in the process, and fell to the wet ground outside. I scrambled to my feet and sprinted through the rain, never looking back. The sound of the house groaning, creaking, and shifting echoed behind me as I tore down the dirt road, back to my car. When I finally reached it, I jumped in and sped away. The image of that cursed farmhouse burned into my mind. I never went back to Black Hollow Farm. The locals say that anyone who enters never leaves the same. Now I believe them. I still hear that creaking sound in my dreams, the rocking chair swaying, and the family's eyes watching me from the darkness. If you ever find yourself in Wyndham, and you hear whispers about Black Hollow Farm, do yourself a favor. Stay away. Some houses are cursed for a reason, and Black Hollow, well, it has a way of holding on to you, even after you leave. Well, there you have it. 3 stories of abandoned houses that hide more than just cobwebs. Sometimes what's been left behind isn't as empty as it seems. Maybe next time you see one of these lonely places, you'll think twice about venturing inside. After all, you never know who or what might be waiting for you. As always, thanks for joining me for another night of terror. If you have a story that's even scarier, share it in the comments. And remember, those dark corners you try to avoid, they're where the real nightmares live. This is Mr. Scary Guy saying, sleep well, if you dare. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe by clicking the icon above. We've also got a playlist full of scary stories on your left side, and a suggested video you'll love on the right. Choose one and keep the scares going.